My friends, there comes a time in every nation's story when silence can no longer be an option. A time when the weight of history demands that we speak with clarity, when the future of our democracy depends not on whispered conversations behind closed doors, but on the courage to say aloud what so many already feel in their hearts. I did not plan to stand here today with words as sharp as the ones I carry. I would have preferred to watch quietly, to let the next generation take its turn at steering this great experiment in self-government. But what I have witnessed compels me to speak. What I have seen forces me to raise my voice, because the truth is, the stakes have grown too high, and the consequences of complacency too severe. We are living through a moment unlike any other in our lifetimes. The values we once took for granted, the rule of law, the peaceful transfer of power, the simple idea that truth matters, are under relentless assault. And the man who has led that assault, who has stoked anger and division as fuel for his own ambition, now asks for the chance to do it all again. We are told to overlook the chaos, to shrug off the lies, to ignore the damage as if it were just noise in the background. But this is not background noise. This is the sound of our democracy in distress, of institutions tested to the breaking point, of a people asked to surrender not just their trust, but their very sense of what is real. Now, I know the argument his defenders make. They say it was all bluster, all theater, all part of some unconventional style. They tell us not to take him literally. But friends, we have seen what happens when words drip with venom. We have felt the consequences when leaders treat facts as inconveniences and scapegoating as strategy. Families divided at dinner tables, communities pitted against one another, violence in the streets. A capital overrun by those convinced that patriotism means breaking windows and beating police officers with flags. That is not theater, that is not style, that is the cost of recklessness. Let me be clear, this is not about left or right. It's not about liberal versus conservative. Our nation has always thrived on honest debate, on disagreements over policy, on competing visions for how best to govern. That is healthy, that is democracy. What is not healthy, what corrodes the very foundation of our republic, is when leaders tell you that the only truth is the one they invent, that the only loyalty worth having is to them, not the Constitution, not the country, not your fellow citizens. When power becomes the goal instead of the means to serve, when fear replaces hope as the driving force of politics, we risk losing not just an election, but our very identity as a free people. I have listened as he claims to speak for the forgotten man and woman. I have heard him paint himself as the voice of those left behind by globalization, automation, by a system that too often does leave people behind. And I will admit, he taps into real pain. There are families in this country struggling to pay bills, workers wondering if their jobs will be shipped overseas, young people crushed under the weight of student debt. There are parents who fear that no matter how hard they work, they can't give their children a better future. That pain is real. That anxiety is real. But instead of offering real solutions, instead of building bridges of opportunity, he points fingers. He blames immigrants. He demonizes the press. He tells you that your neighbor is the enemy. And in doing so, he distracts us from the real challenges, the ones that require unity and vision and hard work. Because it is easier to divide than to solve, easier to rile up a crowd than to lift up a country. What I find most troubling is not just what he says, but how many are willing to follow him down that path. How many elected officials who know better have chosen silence, or worse, complicity. They have decided that holding on to power is more important than holding on to principle. That winning the next election matters more than preserving the democracy that makes elections possible in the first place. I understand the temptations of politics. I know how hard it can be to resist the pull of ambition. But when the health of the republic is at stake, when the example we set for our children is at stake, silence is not an option. Excuses are not an option. History will not remember the clever maneuvering or the short-term gains. It will remember who stood up when democracy was on the line and who chose to look away. I have been asked why I chose to speak now. Why not remain above the fray, let others take on this fight? And the answer is simple, because I still believe in this country. I still believe in the promise of America, not as a slogan, but as a living truth, something we renew with each generation, and I refuse to let that promise be reduced to a punchline. I refuse to let it be hijacked by cynicism and cruelty disguised as strength. The America I know, the America my grandparents taught me to believe in, is not a place where we turn on one another for sport. It is not a place where leaders call their opponents enemies of the people. It is not a place where loyalty to a single man is demanded as proof of patriotism. That is not who we are. That is not who we can afford to become. Now some will say I am being dramatic, that I am exaggerating the threat. To those people, I would simply ask, have you been paying attention? Did you not see the courts twisted into instruments of loyalty? Did you not see public servants threatened for doing their jobs with integrity? Did you not hear the chants at rallies, the insults hurled at anyone who dared to dissent? These are not hypotheticals. These are not warnings about some distant future. This is what has already happened. And if we allow it to happen again, if we normalize it, then shame on us. Because democracies do not collapse in one moment of chaos. They wither slowly, corroded by apathy, by cynicism, by the belief that nothing we do can change the outcome. But I am here to tell you it does not have to be that way. We are not helpless. We are not doomed to repeat the same mistakes. I have walked through communities devastated by job loss, but I have also seen those same communities rebound when given the tools and support they need. I have met young activists fighting for climate action, for gun safety, for racial justice, and I have seen how their passion is reshaping the future already. I have watched neighbors show up for one another in the aftermath of hurricanes, floods, wildfires, and pandemics, proving that the spirit of America is alive and well, even when leadership fails. And I know that spirit is stronger than any one man. It is stronger than lies, it is stronger than fear, but it needs us to believe in it. It needs us to defend it. It needs us to stand up and say enough. America's promise belongs to the people, not to the personality of one leader. It has never been about the rise or fall of a single man, or the cult that grows around his name. It has never been about the image plastered on banners, or the chants at rallies, or the slogans that fill stadiums. It has always been about ordinary men and women who wake up every morning with hope in their hearts and work on their shoulders, about families who believe that if they sacrifice today, their children will inherit a tomorrow worth fighting for. The promise of this nation is not sealed in the fortunes of one individual, but in the collective courage of millions who demand freedom, equality, and dignity. When this country was founded, the leaders who shaped its first steps understood something profound. No king, no tyrant, no ruler should ever stand above the will of the people. They had seen what happens when power is concentrated in the hands of one, when loyalty is demanded not to a set of principles, but to a single man. That is why they wrote a constitution, not a crown. That is why they chose a republic, not a throne. They built institutions to outlast ambition, to restrain arrogance, to make sure that no matter who occupied the highest office, the office itself would be accountable to the people. And for generations, even in times of crisis, even when leaders stumbled, even when the system bent under the weight of conflict, it did not break because the people remembered that the promise of America was bigger than one man. Yet today, we are being asked to forget that history. We are told that our loyalty should be to a name, not to an idea. We are told that to question one man's word is to betray the nation, that to hold him accountable is to conspire against our own. We are told that he alone can fix it, that without him the country collapses, that his voice is the only one worth hearing. That is not patriotism. That is not democracy. That is idolatry dressed up as politics, a hollow promise that trades freedom for the illusion of strength. And it is dangerous because once we accept that the promise of America belongs to one leader, we abandon the very essence of who we are. The true strength of this nation has never rested in the hands of a single figure. It rests in the soldier who defends a flag, not because of who sits in the Oval Office, but because of what that flag represents. It rests in the teacher who stays late in her classroom, shaping young minds to believe in possibility. It rests in the nurse who works through the night, knowing her duty is to every patient, not just the privileged or the powerful. It rests in the immigrant who arrives with nothing but determination and builds a life that strengthens our shared story. It rests in the voices of citizens who stand in line to vote, believing their small act of participation matters just as much as any speech or decree from the highest podium in the land. The promise of America is written in the stories of people who never make the headlines but who hold this country together day after day. It is written in the resilience of a single mother who works 2 jobs but still finds time to help her child with homework. It is written in the courage of a factory worker who speaks out when he sees injustice on the job. It is written in the faith of a community that refuses to surrender when disaster strikes. That is the fabric of America, stitched together not by the personality of one leader, but by the determination of its people. And yet, there are those who want us to forget this truth. They want us to believe that democracy is fragile because it cannot survive without their hand at the wheel. They want us to see the institutions of our republic not as safeguards of liberty, but as obstacles to be bulldozed. They want us to see the press not as a free voice of accountability, but as an enemy to be silenced. They want us to see our neighbors not as partners in a shared destiny, but as rivals in a zero-sum game. And when we accept that narrative, when we give in to the myth that one man alone defines our future, we allow the promise of America to be hijacked. But look closer, and you will see something undeniable. This country is greater than the sum of any one person's ambition. Leaders come and go, movements rise and fall, but the spirit of the people endures. It is the same spirit that fought for independence when the odds were stacked against them. It is the same spirit that marched for civil rights, that demanded justice in the face of fire hoses and batons, that sang freedom songs when silence would have been safer. It is the same spirit that rebuilt after wars, after depressions, after tragedies that tested our resolve. And every time, it was not the cult of one leader that carried us forward. It was the determination of a people who refused to give up on one another. I have walked through towns where the factories shut down, where main streets were hollowed out, where families were told the American dream was no longer theirs to claim. I have listened to farmers who wonder if their children will stay on the land their families have worked for generations. I have seen students burdened by loans that weigh them down before they even start their adult lives. And in each of these conversations, what I hear is not a cry for one man to save them. What I hear is a call for opportunity, for fairness, for leaders who will remember that their job is to serve, not to be served. What I hear is the timeless demand that America live up to its own promise. And so we must ask ourselves, what happens if we continue to tie our future to the personality of one leader? What happens when disagreement with him becomes disloyalty to the nation, when questioning him becomes treason, when standing up for the Constitution becomes a punishable act? We have already seen glimpses of that future. We have seen mobs convinced that breaking into the people's house was an act of patriotism. We have seen truth twisted beyond recognition, repeated until lies felt more real than facts. We have seen careers destroyed because people chose duty over submission. And if we allow that to become the norm, then we are not just handing over power to one man, we are surrendering the very principle that has held this republic together for more than 2 centuries. Some will say that strong leadership requires us to accept the flaws of a strong man. They will say that his personality is part of the package, that without it there can be no progress, no protection, no prosperity. But I ask you this, what kind of progress is built on lies? What kind of protection is built on fear? What kind of prosperity is built on division? True leadership is not about inflating the ego of one. It is about elevating the lives of many. True strength is not about demanding loyalty at all costs. It is about earning trust through service. True greatness is not about the size of one's rallies or the volume of one's voice. It is about the impact of one's choices on generations yet unborn. We must remember that the oath every public servant takes is not to a man, it is to the Constitution. It is to the idea that all are created equal, that liberty and justice belong to everyone, that no one is above the law. And when leaders forget that oath, when they demand loyalty to themselves instead of to the country, it is up to the people to remind them. It is up to the people to say that the promise of America is not theirs to hoard or to distort. It belongs to us all. I know it can be tempting in times of uncertainty to look for a single figure to carry the burden, to find comfort in the belief that one voice can drown out the chaos. But the story of this nation has always been written by many voices, sometimes messy, sometimes discordant, but always moving us forward. Our strength is not in uniformity, but in unity, not in blind allegiance, but in shared purpose. And if we forget that, if we hand over the keys of our democracy to one personality, we risk losing the very thing that makes America exceptional. America's promise belongs to the people, not to the personality of one leader.